Hello and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. As always, I'm your host, Connor Rebush, and with me also, as always, is Dr. Patrick Wyman. This week, we have some things to talk about. Normally, I try to come up with some off-the-cuff synonym for how amazing last weekend's fights were, but the pattern has held. In UFC Chile, we had a pretty entertaining undercard, pretty damn good, and a really, really dismal main event. UFC Liverpool rolled around. The card looked much the same as UFC Chile. Not much besides the main event was compelling, that is to say. And just like UFC Chile, it ended up the same way, with the undercard offering the only interesting action of the night, and the main event being dull, other than the many, many online arguments about the scoring in the aftermath. The worst thing to have ever happened was this fight, Pat.
It was really bad.
I mean, it's hard to argue with that. You got to be honest. It was an atrocity.
If you found that fight entertaining,
you were in the crowd.
I don't know what to tell you. Yeah, you're from Liverpool and you're a huge Darren Till fan, and that's about the only thing I can think of that explains how you found that fight anything other than abysmal. Because it was abysmal. It was a guy stalking, getting opportunities to throw and not throwing, and a guy trying to draw out opportunities to throw and then not throwing when those opportunities presented themselves. It's not like the chances weren't there for either guy.
Yeah.
That's the thing that's really annoying. It's not like this was one of those fights where both guys just kind of engaged in a staring contest. Like, there were plenty of chances for either guy to actively do things, and neither of them did it. I think Till was desperately worried about not gassing out after having been through that insane weight cut fiasco of his. And I think Thompson, for whatever reason, I think we have underrated the extent to which confidence is the backbone of Thompson's game. And when he feels at all taken out of his groove, whether it's by a big puncher, somebody who is bigger than he expected them to be, or pressure, is just unable to pull the trigger. So we had all of those factors coming together to just make us a shit heap of a 5-round main event.
Yeah, we'll get into all the particulars. There's plenty to discuss. It was at least I don't know. The post-mortem should be more interesting than the actual murder. But just a quick preview of what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. We're going to cover Till Thompson in exhaustive detail. We're going to talk about Arnold Allen versus Mads Bernal, a very entertaining undercard fight in which Arnold Allen got a miracle comeback victory, one of many in the past few weeks, against a shockingly effective Mads Bernal, another young man who may, in fact, as Zane Simon said last week, have a higher ceiling in the end than Arnold Allen. We'll see. There was also Makwan Amirkhani and Jason Knight. They had a strange but very entertaining banger of a fight on the undercard. And then we're going to get into the two fights from next week's very similar-looking fight night card that we find to be captivating enough to break down for you all, those being the main event, Jimmie Rivera versus Marlon Moraes, and the co-main, Gregor Gillespie versus Vince Pichel. So, Till Thompson. Yes. I think I want to hit the point that you mentioned there, Pat, that there were opportunities in this fight. I want to, some people are going to have an immediate response to us saying that the fight sucked and be like, no, it didn't, this and that. Obviously, this is subjective. I still stand my ground in saying
it's not fucking subjective. If you throw, if the two fighters combine to land 68 strikes in 25 minutes, then it's objectively bad.
But your investment in the fight does have a large effect on how much you are willing to enjoy it, basically, how much you can enjoy it. I still say that even though in review I think Thompson-Woodley won was not a great fight, I did enjoy it live. And it felt tense enough, and there was enough payoff to the tension that I was hooked throughout that fight, wondering what was going to happen. It never completely lost my interest.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That's the difference between this and the two Woodley-Thompson fights, is that there were minor payoffs. There was Woodley's big knockdown. There was Woodley's huge ground and pound in the first one. There were things that you could point to as exceptions to the general rule, and that this fight did not offer those rare pleasures.
Even though there was a knockdown, it still was like nothing. Yeah. So I just want to say to the people who will have that reaction, because I know there are people out there who enjoyed this fight. I have heard from a few of them already. just talking about it on Twitter. This is why we say the fight sucked. Stephen Thompson landed 0.8 strikes per minute. The fight lasted for 25 minutes, not including the minutes between rounds. He landed less than a strike per minute. Darren Till, although many of them were like light stomp kicks to the leg, landed 1.6 strikes per minute over the course of the entire 25-minute bout. And the reason that was frustrating is, as you already said, Pat, because there were opportunities. There was a lot to be interested in had it led to something. You know what I mean? Like, I would have had a great time looking at, look at the angles, look at this feint, look at how Stephen Thompson escaped. He gets Darren Till to commit to this direction and then escapes to this direction. All of that, there was some really smart positioning in this fight. It was clear we were looking at two intelligent, well-trained strikers. It's just that neither man was willing to execute the actual goal of fighting an opponent, which is to hit them or to take them down or to do something to them, you know?
Yeah, it was a whole lot of stuff that could conceivably have had a purpose that ended up having none.
Yeah.
And so to some extent, this is just confirmation bias, right? Because we know how the fight played out.
Yeah.
It renders the rest of that activity that we saw, quote unquote activity, much less meaningful. So, yeah, I mean, to some extent, we all just got unlucky, as did Till and Thompson, that nothing, that there was never that one singular moment that allowed an actual fight to break out. That's a phrase that you'll hear if you watch a lot of boxing is, right, oh, it looks like a fight's broken out. No fight broke out here.
No. Because for a fight to break out, one guy has to do enough that the other guy's like, oh, I have to respond. And okay, so let's talk about the fight. I suppose we should.
But the most interesting thing about the fight, in hindsight, was the fact that nothing happened.
Yeah.
That's exactly how that dynamic of nothing happening got created is, in fact, the actual interesting thing here.
True.
Like, that's actually, I mean, not to interrupt, but that's kind of what I wanted to start with is what exactly created the dynamic of nothing happening?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I've seen it suggested in many circles now that, like, maybe Stephen Thompson is declining in some ways. I think there's maybe an argument for that perhaps his durability has taken a hit. You know, like, we remember Stephen Thompson's fight with Matt Brown. He got rocked in that fight, but it was a barn burner, and Stephen Thompson was, like, in that fight. He didn't shut down or seem timid about the idea of taking a shot from as wild and aggressive an opponent as Matt Brown. So there is something there at odds with the iteration of Stephen Thompson we've seen here. But also, I think your point about confidence is really the crux of it. I think there are some things that just don't leap out as obvious factors that really, really have a dramatic impact on how willing Stephen Thompson is to actually do anything. Because, like, the thing is there were obvious opportunities for him to do things in this fight. Like, for example, this is just one specific. Every time he did his karate blitz, you know, rushing forward off to like a shift step off to an angle, however he does it, he's got a few ways, and he would come in alternating punches, these quick little straight combinations. Darren Till didn't get hit by all of them. A couple of times he was very smart and, like, covered up and smothered and stepped in. But most of the time he kind of backed up in a straight line and leaned away. And never, ever, ever threw a counter when Stephen Thompson put his strikes together. And yet, Stephen Thompson put so few strikes together over the course of this fight. Like, by the fourth round, it should have been clear, were Stephen Thompson in a better place mentally, that, he hasn't countered me once. Every time I rush forward, he goes on the defensive. What can I do with that? But something about the dynamic of the fight affected his ability to just make those bold decisions, to put himself out there, which, again, we have seen him do more often in other matchups.
Yeah, he looked incredibly risk-averse.
Right.
And that is looking like it's increasingly the defining feature of Thompson's game when he's in these 25-minute matchups. Like, I don't know if something happened in that first Woodley fight that just broke him. Is
it the 5 rounds? Is it just that he's just awful in 5-rounders?
But he wasn't like, remember the Rory McDonald fight?
Yeah, that was still a pretty slow, like, underwhelming fight based on what we expected.
No, he landed like 110 strikes in that fight.
Yeah, fair.
he landed a lot. He threw and landed a lot of shots in that fight, despite being aware of the fact that he was at risk. That if he got taken down, he was going to be in enormous trouble.
True, it was just more dominant and one-sided than we expected, I guess. But he did let quite a few shots go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was Thompson's best all-around performance.
Yeah,
in terms of
that's fair.
What he was facing there. But I don't know if he's. I don't really understand. It's like, I'm not saying that he is a broken fighter or that he's not going to win fights or anything like that. But it's like some switch flipped in him where he went from being comfortable with risk to being totally uncomfortable with risk. I mean, because he was never really in danger in that Masvidal fight, and that's when you started to see him really come out. Like, it's that he wasn't afraid of Masvidal's punch at all. Maybe that's it. Maybe he senses that he's a guy who's been getting hit in the head since he was, like a preteen, and that's probably not great for him, and he maybe can't take that many shots anymore.
Yeah, there is a thing where, like, pretty much whenever Stephen Thompson gets hit with a flush shot in the head these days, he does seem to go down. Which you could point to durability issues, but also I wonder if that doesn't just track back to he doesn't want to get hit. Like, he gets hit clean in the head so infrequently that it's like maybe he really is still not really comfortable with the idea. But again, he's done it more boldly in other fights. He's done so with more comfort. My best guess is that people who really throw Stephen Thompson off, who have the biggest effect on his confidence, are those who seem to like break his understanding of how distance is supposed to work. Whether it's Tyron Woodley being able to cover distance with extreme speed, and so Stephen Thompson feels that he cannot judge it the way all of his experience has taught him to do normally, or whether it's Darren Till's height and reach.
Till has a really weird rhythm and really weird movement patterns too. I think that's actually a better explanation for this than like maybe there's some aspect of him not feeling like he can take the shots he used to, because he dove into the pocket with fucking Robert Whittaker in was that like 2014 or 2015?
He was hella aggressive against Johnny Hendricks. He wasn't afraid of he took a few good left hands from Johnny Hendricks and didn't even blink twice. He hit him back,
Yeah, so maybe that's changed in the last few fights. That's entirely possible. Like, he might have gotten dinged in a sparring session and since then just not felt quite the same when taking a shot. Stuff like that happens. That is not at all unheard of or uncommon. So that could be a factor. But I think you're absolutely right about distance. And Till, as bad a fight as this was, Till did a great job of messing with Thompson's distance, of taking away long range from him, of mixing up his rhythm, of mixing up the angles that he tried to come in on, of using that probing lead hand to hit Thompson from distances where he's not used to being hit. Like, Till really did a fantastic job of that.
Yeah, and threw a lot of kicks.
Capitalize on it, but
threw a fair few kicks too, which not a lot of people do against Stephen Thompson. But to be able to own some segment of that range, I think, had a big effect on Thompson as well. Yeah, it was like you just got the sense that Thompson didn't feel like he was able to time Till. Even though, like, he could. It was clear he could. There were plenty of times where he would lace Till with a good, clean shot. I say plenty. There were a few times where he had notable ease hitting Darren Till. But it was clear throughout the fight he just didn't seem comfortable pulling the trigger. It didn't seem like he felt like he had the timing. He wasn't sure of himself. So I suppose we should address the scoring just briefly. How did you score this fight live, Pat? And has your perception of it changed since?
So as I was watching it, I didn't even try to score it, and I just thought, I have no idea who's winning this fight. And frankly, I thought that at some point, I didn't even pay that much attention, because at some point I thought like something substantial was going to happen, that it was a given that at some point somebody was going to land something that mattered enough to set the tone for the fight, and then there would be something clear that came as a result of that. That never happened. And so when it got to the end of the fifth round, it was the knockdown. I was like, okay, so I'm pretty sure Till won that round. I think Thompson won the first few. Other than that, it was hard to score, and it was hard for me to care enough to score.
It's a real disappointment when your act of waiting for the fight to start is interrupted by the final bell. Real disappointing way to take in a contest. Yeah, I also like I had basically a soft score. The general vibe I got was that Stephen Thompson won the first few rounds. That I thought the first 3 were more or less his. I thought 4 was close, and 5 was Till's because it was the only clear round of the fight, basically. And then, like, reviewing it, I think the slowness of this fight really threw off my usual, like, benchmarks for how I judge what's happening. You know, like, you can't keep up with every single strike and keep track of everything that happens in every round that you see. You kind of have a vague sense, a sort of, like, chart in your head that sways towards one fighter or towards the other based on what's happening at the moment. And so, like, typically, the kind of strikes that were landing mostly, especially from Till, would have a very slight tug on that line, on that graph for me normally, because there would be a lot of other things happening outweighing them. And so, like, watching this live, the second round, for example, was one in which all 3 judges gave to Darren Till. And I thought that sounded quite shocking, because, like, I'm pretty sure Darren Till didn't do shit until, like, round 4. But that was mostly true, except that Stephen Thompson did also nothing, and just happened to land, like, the only headshots in that round. But I just reviewed it, and yeah, it felt more like a Till round than anything else. Round 2. So that's the problem, you know? Like, the thing is, unfortunately for Stephen Thompson, I always come away from fights like this feeling like he let it go. It wasn't like it looked like he had no answers. It wasn't like he looked old in the sense that he was, like, too slow or didn't have the power or whatever. It was like he had largely the kind of fight that he wanted, and just didn't actually seize on the opportunities. He should have been working the legs, he should have been working the body, he should have been putting his shots together. Not constantly, just put some things together. He should have been countering. He's good at that, you know? But he didn't throw hardly any counters in the entire fight. And that was crazy, because Darren Till was throwing almost exclusively single shots, which should be an invitation for a counterpuncher. And, yeah. It was like Darren Till didn't commit to anything and had reach. That's the best I can tell. That it had a profound effect on how comfortable Stephen Thompson felt.
Yeah. Yeah, I think both guys kept waiting for a sign, and the sign just kind of never really came. It's, you know, I don't... Yeah, I mean, the results, sometimes you just are going to get an abysmal fight. It's not like... The really frustrating thing about this is that neither guy is shot. No. Neither guy is raw. These are both prime fighters. Like, Stephen Thompson should be in his late prime, and I think is in his late prime, and Darren Till should be just coming into his prime.
Yeah.
It's not like either guys of these is a too raw prospect. Like, when Eric Anders versus Lyoto Machida was also a pretty abysmal fight. But that was explicable by the fact that Machida is completely washed, yeah, and Anders is incredibly raw. Right, like that, it made sense. There were good reasons for that, yeah, for the dynamic of the fight to be so basic and so flawed that it gave us that outcome. This felt like kind of a 1 in 100 chance of just like a whole bunch of factors coming together in really bad ways to produce this abysmal piece of shit.
And it was worse. As you said before we started recording, it was worse than Machida Anders. Less entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, you expect a raw as hell prospect to have a kind of some weird bad fights, yeah, while they're figuring things out, and you expect some washed veterans to have some bad fights. Like, that's not like Belfort Marquardt was not exactly a fucking banger, you know. You expect guys who are past it, who have demonstrable trouble pulling the trigger, who aren't as fast as they used to be, whose games have been shaved down by age and durability problems. You expect that, and you expect holes in guys' games who are young and up and coming and don't have like a deep background to draw on. What was disappointing about this is that we know that both Till and Thompson are capable of doing more, and frankly needed to do more. Like, Thompson, for the sake of their careers, they needed to do more. Yeah, like that's another really frustrating thing is like, okay, so this was the best outcome for the welterweight division, just giving us another contender who can conceivably be slotted into other top matchups and kind of move things along here. But nobody should be real excited to see Till after this. And Thompson really needed to make something happen to kind of make a case for himself as a guy who still deserves big money fights. And he didn't really do that either. So.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the $1 million question, I guess, to wrap this discussion up. Much of our discussion last week centered on all the questions we had about Darren Till that had yet to be answered. And, it was kind of hard to know what he was really capable of because just hadn't really seen him do that much yet. And against a certain level of opposition, now he's had a fight against a certifiable top welterweight. But it looked like this. Have any of your questions about Darren Till been satisfactorily answered?
It changes the nature of my questions about him to the extent that I think we have a much better sense for the depth of the skill sets that he has, which is impressive. He knows how to do a lot more things than I think we thought he knew how to do. I think we have a better sense for his kind of intangibles in terms of like his command of angles, his understanding of how somebody's going to move through the space of the cage, about how to mess and manipulate with distance and manipulate distance and rhythm and timing. I think we have a better sense for that. I think he's less of a counterpuncher than we thought he was. I think we had seen some flashes of really good counters in the past, and those were strangely absent here.
It's really all about the pot shots, like the quick 1-2. It's like interruptive stop hits are the only kind of counters he really throws. Like he'll wait for you to do anything and then just rack you with the left hand once you start to move, like same time shit. But in terms of which is
less of a counter than him just seeing a particular moment as a trigger to throw the same punch he was going to throw anyway.
Whereas hitting a defensive move and then throwing a counter, we didn't see any of that from Till.
He's basically it makes sense as a kind of a stylistic comparison because he's a big southpaw puncher, but he's like Conor McGregor without the inside angle counter.
Yeah. I mean, in fairness, he's like Conor McGregor without a lot of the counters. But
like in the sense that at a roughly similar stage of their careers, McGregor was roughly debuting in the UFC, and he already had that kind of counterpunching acumen.
Yeah.
Which I think they're pretty similar in terms of how they approach things with pressure, forcing you back to the fence to make a mistake, and taking away your ability to escape the left hand. The difference was when you rushed McGregor to try to get away from that fence and to try to limit his ability to pot shot you, he had the perfect answer for that, which Till does not have.
Yeah, and I gotta say, like a lot of the little in between moves that make McGregor so effective were like present here, like all of the stomp kicks and stuff, very Machida-esque, just giving the other person something to focus on and worry about while you are maintaining the distance. Staying busy. Like Till did a better job of that than I even realized watching it live. I wouldn't say he looked busier than he was. Somehow he looked less busy than he was, but he was actually like touching, and there's something to that. The thing is like, I still don't know how Till's style of, like, if he were to fight this way, how does that match up against somebody who really confidently comes forward with a combination when he pressures them? Who waits on that left hand, slips it, and then comes back with 3 and moves forward with each punch. He didn't seem to demonstrate that many layers beyond his offense.
Yeah, somebody like Santiago Ponzinibbio is a nightmarish matchup for him.
Yeah,
even somebody like Colby Covington, who's just willing to throw shots,
right,
seems like a tough matchup for Till.
Right. I mean, he's going to be hitting these people with power and precision, and he has that kind of like special accuracy that makes McGregor such a devastating puncher. He just hits people sharp and on the right point. But, defensively, there's not a lot there. It's mostly leaning away and waving your hands at whatever's coming at you from Darren Till. So, don't know. Obviously, neither of us are satisfied with this fight, but there are some interesting things from this card. People should be looking forward to our episode for next week, by the way. Some people have been saying, man, you guys seem really bummed by MMA lately. But MMA has been kind of a bummer lately. So there's really nothing to say for that. These have just not been compelling cards to go into, and all of these main events feel like they have just left a terribly sour taste in my mouth after the fact. But again, yeah.
This is the downside to having 5-round main events on all of these cards. It's right. Like I'm mostly all for having 5-round main events, and these fights deserve 5-round main events. But like when you have a limited number of pieces to put together, you're not always going to get a compelling 25-minute matchup out of it.
We talked about this before as it regards boxing. and all of the 12-rounders, and how a 12-rounder is either the best thing because it provides all this room for drama and momentum swings, or the worst thing because it's a full half hour of nothing happening, which is just far too long.
A half hour is a really long time if it's not good. Yes. Like, for every like weird Swanson Lobov that turns into like this fun, quick-paced banger, you're gonna get your occasional Thompson Tills.
Yeah.
Which I guess that just sometimes happen. Okay, so I thought of a perfect analog for this fight, and it's Machida Musashi, which was also a slow-paced 5-round, mostly striking affair between those guys. But somehow that fight felt better.
That one was good. Yeah. Well, like, things were happening. You know, like, there were moments that stand out as like, oh, momentous. Machida went for a submission at one point. He had a cool foot sweep. You know, he threw a couple combinations. Musashi was constantly pressuring, but there were very few moments in which Machida just stood in one place and Musashi stood in one place, and they were both in a position to probably do something, but neither of them did. So, yeah, it's a good parallel. Like, the thing is this is not an uncommon dynamic for a fight to have. It's just that normally it leads to things. Because, like I said, a lot of positions in this fight, a lot of angle changes, a lot of smart movements, forward and backward, in and out of range. Like, it just didn't lead to the offense that those things are supposed to lead to. So, just unsatisfying is really the word for it, I think. But, as I was going to say, the undercard was there to save us. There was some interesting stuff on here. We're both fans of Arnold Allen. I think we'll both be fans of Mads Bernal going forward after the performance he turned in against him. And we'll talk about that after this. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now, let's get back to it. Oh, yeah. There was, like, some story about his girlfriend was being attacked, but then, like, the story from bystanders was that he was, like, drunk and just, like, flailing. I mean, the image is funny at the very least. Arnold Allen headlocking his girlfriend and flailing with his free arm as if he's being swarmed, but it's like 6 women around him.
Yes, apparently.
Jesus.
Not great. Not great, Bob.
So, okay. We'll clarify that when the next one kicks in. You want to start?
Yeah, let's just roll.
Alrighty. And welcome back to Heavy Hands, Pat. We're fans of Arnold Allen as a fighter. As you pointed out to me, he has gotten into some I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Untoward affairs outside the cage.
He's gotten into some affrays.
Some affrays. That's a good one. Nice.
I believe that's actually the legal term for the crime he committed, too.
Oh, well, there you go, Arnold. Okay, well, Arnold Allen has, for some time now, been seen as a top prospect. He fought here on the undercard against Mads Bernal, and the reason for that is clear. Like, he's got a lot of wins. They're all pretty good wins, given his level of experience. He's 24 years old, and can kind of do everything pretty well. And so he looks like the kind of ideal Rory McDonald-esque prospect you would hope for. And Mads Bernal is a guy who has shown flashes of good things, has shown an aggressive submission game, not that usually tends to work at the highest level, has also shown like combination counterpunching and some head movement in spots, has shown flashes of what kind of fighter he might eventually turn into. I was not prepared for how good Mads Bernal looked in this fight. I kind of just assumed Arnold Allen would just have a bunch of advantages everywhere. Mads Bernal fought a smart fight and showed off a shitload of skill in the process.
Yeah, that was really impressive. I did not know much about Mads Bernal going into this fight. And in fact, I think I had seen his fight with Mike Santiago, and that was it.
Yeah. And he had a fight with Michel Prazer. I mean, the thing is you would have no reason to know much about Mads Bernal because nothing up to this point has been remotely as impressive as this fight was.
Yeah, I mean, but he showed some real flashes here. How long has he been fighting?
He's also 24. and I think he's been fighting less for not as long as Arnold Allen. Let's look into it real quick. The interesting thing was, like, this feels very prescient now, but Zane Simon, friend of the show and co-host of the MMA Vivisection on Bloody Elbow, he was saying last week during the Vivi that Arnold Allen is, like, he's the prospect, but Mads Bernal might eventually surpass him. And I kind of get what he was saying, like, a lot after watching this fight, because Arnold Allen feels like a fighter who has, despite being young, has already kind of figured out what his game is. And you kind of, you watch him fight and you're like, okay, I know what he's going to look like down the road. It's going to be like Rory McDonald, where he just slowly adds new pieces. Otherwise, he's just a grinder everywhere who can do anything everywhere. Mads Bernal was showing some flashes of, like, prodigious kind of talent here that Allen has rarely actually shown, I think. Would you agree with that?
I think Allen is the kind of guy who is going to maximize his physical gifts, which are not substantial.
Sure.
Like, Allen is not super fast. He's not a real big hitter. He's very strong. Like, he's shockingly strong. And in fact, I'm told he comes from a family of strength event competiters.
Comes from a family of steroid abusers, apparently, according to his baffling post-fight interview.
Yeah, that was just bizarre. It was very strange. But if you see videos of Arnold doing Arnold Allen doing strength and conditioning, he is shockingly strong for a guy who probably walks at 175 or so.
It kind of makes sense. You watch him in his fights, and he muscles people in the clinch pretty well, and when he locks up a submission, it's locked.
Yeah, he's a hoss in terms of his like ability to generate power and strength, but, like, he's not a big puncher. He's not especially fast. And at 24, you would expect him to be kind of at close to his athletic peak. Like, maybe in the next couple of years, he'll get a little bit faster, but not much. Mads Bernal looks like a guy who's really athletically gifted, still is only kind of scratching the surface of what he can do. The timing and drive on his reactive takedowns was insanely good. His head movement and angles and like willingness and ability to throw combinations were pretty exceptional here. I mean, he's 1-2 in the UFC now. I hope he gets another shot because he could be real good. I hope it would not go amiss for him to move up to 155. He would not be an undersized lightweight. And the combination of that and maybe he gets to a bigger camp, like, that's the dude who could do some stuff.
Yeah, he had, I mean, let's be honest, like, he shouldn't be cut. He had this fight in the bag, and Arnold Allen saved himself with a comeback. For those who haven't seen this, you should watch it. It was an entertaining fight and will open your eyes about a guy that you also probably didn't know a damn thing about before this event. Again, didn't have any reason to. But, Bernal came out looking like some Robbie Lawler shit. Like, he immediately made me think of Dwight Muhammad Qawi. I don't know how many people are familiar with that boxer, but, like, this real low, he was using a legitimate cross-armed guard for many portions of the fight. Just these giving the shoulder, dipping under, and doing all of these things in such a way that all the things people complain about head movement in MMA were not factors. He wasn't at risk because he was pressuring. He was in Allen's face. Allen couldn't get off a head kick or whatever, or, an easy shot like that to take advantage. And the head movement was constant. The slot of his head was always changing. And he was constantly firing off of those defensive movements. So it was like a really aggressive style of head movement that I think a lot of people could learn from to use in MMA. Like, when you are walking a guy down and you're a difficult target, not a lot of MMA fighters can select their shots well enough to make you pay for that. And then when you combine that, like, boxing and wrestling have always had this nice relationship. They work well together, better than most people realize. When you use those angles you're getting from your boxing moves to hit takedowns, when you're drawing out boxing type counters and then countering them with wrestling instead, like, yeah, you look like you have a full package, basically. It just looks like a total skill set. And, I loved it, man. And Bernal was, like, getting cocky as the fight went on. He was showing off and, like, just giving his head to Allen and just making him miss 3-4 shots in a row. I loved it.
I'm looking. I really did not know much of anything about Bernal, and I'm looking through his Instagram, and I'm really interested in this. So, like, his skill sets are fascinating. he spends a lot of time doing like boxing. He's a big boxing fan based on the clips he's posting here. Like, and some going back to like 90s James Toney. He's like, oh yeah, look at the technique here. Isn't that cool?
Hell yeah, my boy.
And then he does, it looks like he does a lot of like genuine actual wrestling. Like he gets in a singlet and he wrestles. So I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of taken by this Mads Bernal. Like, no shame in getting in your 2 losses in the UFC getting ground down by now welterweight Michel Prazeres in your debut as a 23-year-old, and then getting choked out by a really experienced prospect in a fight you were winning. Yeah. So hopefully he gets another chance. I think he should. I think he's earned another shot because the talent seems to be pretty legit.
Yeah, it was hard to miss. It was hard to miss his abilities, his raw abilities in this fight, and skill too. Like, it's clear the man is thinking about his skill set and very clearly evolving in a really promising way at a really fast rate. So,
yeah. Real quick, I wanted to mention Neil Magny. Just because, not because of anything that he really did in this fight that made me think like, oh my God, this is a different Neil Magny. It's just nice to be reminded sometimes of the difference between a top 10 guy and a late replacement.
Yes. Yeah. I always think of when Chris Camozzi got cut by the UFC and then he broke a dude's leg and then he knocked out Jeremy Kimball, who is now a light heavyweight in the UFC. Like, he very quickly eradicated 2 regional circuit fighters. And it's like, oh yeah, Chris Camozzi is one of the best fighters in the world. You know, it's hard to remember that sometimes when you're watching him fight other fighters who are even better, or peers who are also among the best fighters in the world. But yeah, Neil Magny, like, it's nice to be reminded, especially that if you let Neil Magny posture up in half guard, you're done. Like, he has some skill sets where he is legitimately dangerous. We just don't always get to see them.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the dude is, and Magny is still getting substantially better. I think is a point that's I think he's still improving. Like, there's always going to be a ceiling on how good he can be just because he's not that athletically talented. Mm-hmm. And I think eventually he's probably going to need to continue to pack on muscle and move up to 185. But like, yeah, I think skill wise he's still making some pretty substantial improvements.
Sure. I think that's fair. He's I have a ton of respect for Neil Magny, and he's like renowned for being an intelligent and super hard-working fighter.
Yeah, and, we are Neil Magny heads.
Yeah. It's just that, you know, we can acknowledge, still liking the man, that not all of his fights are that great. It's okay.
Well, he's a fringe. He's a fringe top 10 fighter in a division that needs fringe top 10 fighters to be good, and he is.
And I respect Neil Magny because oftentimes when he does turn in a performance where it's like not that great, it still feels in a way like better than he should be capable of, given his raw abilities. It's still like, okay, he's doing a lot with not that much. So
and then he gets into those fights where Rafael dos Anjos knocks him down with a leg kick and arm triangles because
or Lorenz Larkin puts his foot through his sternum,
and Neil Magny is pretty good.
Yeah, or you just see just the athletic disparity when Lorenz Larkin puts his foot straight through his torso. Like, it's
yeah, that was brutal, man. Yeah. Lorenz Larkin, what's happened to that dude, man? 2 straight losses in Bellator, got knocked out by Paul Daly, and got beat up by Douglas Lima.
Lorenz Larkin is going to go down as like a Melvin Gillard. He has one of those completely bizarre careers where he's just so talented, and yet none of it seems to stack up for any like clear story of who this man is and how he's progressed.
Yeah, it's just what a bizarre career he's had.
Still fascinating though, that Lorenz Larkin. Cool guy to talk to, by the way. Heavy Hands episode way back. I did talk to him when they were in Cincinnati, so.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Jesus, that was a long time ago.
It was a long-ass time ago.
That was May of 2014.
Boy, that sounds right. It was when Matt Brown versus Eric Silva. But Lorenz was very cool. He was very cool and really enjoyed talking about technique. Like, so yeah, that was fun. Anyway, one more fight from this undercard before we move on to Utica. Loath as we are to do so. Makwan Amirkhani and Jason Knight. I feel so vindicated just in the fact that last week I repeatedly described this as a fight between 2 pseudo prospects. And that is what it looked like. 2 guys where you're like, man, either one of these is almost a prospect. One of these guys is almost an up-and-comer. And yet I just don't feel good really calling them that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're weird. I mean, I think especially Amir Khani, because
Yeah.
this division is deep enough that if you think he's kind of a marketable dude, you can continue giving him fights like this that are basically fun matchups against dudes who aren't really on their way up or really on their way down, that feel like something but aren't. And it's just there are enough featherweights now that you can do that and have him kind of hanging around.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he should quit fighting personally and take up a career as a podcaster. You know, that story he told after the fight was so fascinating. Just electrifying.
What the fuck? Like, it's just a strange man.
It really is. Okay, so I kind of want to talk about Jason Knight because, like, we're fans of Jason Knight. He's obvious. I mean, anybody who watches him fight must be. He's a lot of fun. And, like, looking back, the run he put together when we were like, maybe Jason Knight will continue improving and turn into a prospect. Now that seems less likely. But honestly, the run he put together, Jim Ayler's, Dan Hooker, Alex Caceres, Chaz Skelly, it still looks pretty good to me. That's a pretty solid win streak. Now he's lost 3 in a row. And in each of those 3, we have seen, like, disturbing signs that the confidence which marked those impressive 4 runs, those impressive 4 wins, rather. The confidence on the feet especially is not there anymore. It's like Jason Knight has reverted to the kind of fighter he was before he got to the UFC. And not entirely. There were plenty of moments in this fight where he became emboldened after the first round, for example, and started talking shit and owning the striking exchanges. But the first round of this fight, Jason Knight looked shook by the fact that Makwan Amirkhani was countering him. And, you know, like, that wasn't the case against Dan Hooker or Alex Caceres. He knew he was going to take shots in those fights and knew he was going to walk through them to land something better. And that wasn't the case here. And it wasn't the case against Benitez. And does it all just go back to the fact that Lamas lit his ass up and put him down in 1 round? Like, is that it?
Yeah.
That he just got wrecked got pushed way too far too soon, got wrecked, and now his confidence in his boxing is very, very spotty?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really an evidence of how much confidence does for you.
Sure.
As a fighter whose skills are fairly limited, it's not like Knight kind of overnight turned into some, like, hyper technician on the feet. It's just that he wasn't afraid to throw.
It was all desire, you know? He was just down for a fucking fight, and so he got them.
Yeah, and if you're down for a fight and you're just not that worried about getting hit back, and you have reasonably quick hands and some pop, that'll take you a long way as long as your confidence is high. But if your confidence is not that high, suddenly your relatively limited well of technique and doesn't really take you that far. And I think that's kind of what we've seen here in the last few fights, is that, like, Knight does not know how to do that many different things on the feet. It's not like he has some deep well of technique to draw from. Which should be kind of worrisome, considering it's not like he's raw in this sport. Like, he's been fighting for 7-8 years.
Yeah.
He should know how to do more things than he does.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, like, when the confidence sort of recovered in the second round of this fight, at least it was clear that he had, despite having a somewhat limited set of tools, it was clear that his, like, understanding of how fighting works was still enough for him to get by at this level. He was moving his head, mostly straight back, but shit, Darren Till does that. You know, he was, like, getting his chin away from shots. He was countering in combinations. He did adjust to what was giving him trouble in the first round of this fight. So it's good to see from Jason Knight that he can still, you know, actively react to what's happening in the fight rather than just, like, be broken by what's happening. But, yeah, it was so weird. Like, ain't confidence a bitch, Pat? Because, like, Makwan Amirkhani comes out, for all of the world, looks like he has fully decided to just box with Jason Knight. It works surprisingly well because he's so confident, and Jason Knight wasn't, for, like, the first 2 minutes. And then it all started to fall apart, and yet it took Amirkhani so long before he seemed to fully commit to the idea of taking Knight down, because Jason Knight just doesn't scramble back to his feet, and you can hold him down if that's what you want to do. And you are as skilled a submission grappler as Amirkhani. So, like, Amirkhani's still woefully overconfident in his striking ability, Like didn't look like he had really added any layers in the year since his last fight. And Jason Knight looking totally shaken by the fact that Amir Khan just didn't care. It was a weird fight. It was weird. Entertaining, but weird.
Yeah. There was one more fighter I wanted to talk about here before we move on to talking about Fight Night Utica, because apparently that's a thing. Was Tom Breese. Who has not fought in he has not fought in almost 2 years. He's a guy that we've liked quite a bit on this show. I think we've liked his athletic gifts. We've liked his frame. We've liked the skill sets that he's shown flashes of. And he just fucking carved up Dan Kelly in this on this card. Absolutely carved him up. And that outcome, honest to God, it was surprising that it took as long as it did, given the volume and type of shots Breeze was throwing and landing.
Yeah. Yeah, like the closer we got to this fight, the worse this matchup seemed for Dan Kelly. Tom Breese is just not the guy that you're going to sort of like slow but relentlessly walk down with like weird stilted jabs and everything and no head movement. Like when Breese has a reach advantage, it's clear that really threw him off when he fought Sean Strickland, that he didn't have the reach advantage. But when he does, when he feels that his size is a factor, he's a really sharp striker. A really, really educated jab. Love the sort of trickiness in his rhythm when he will throw away the jab and come back with that uppercut. He actually did it a couple times before the one that I think just grazed Kelly's eye, and that's what ended up stopping him. But really clever in how he stays mostly pot-shotting, but comes up with creative, interesting ways of stringing those shots together, so they're still very difficult to predict.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I thought there was a lot to be said for that. I don't know. I mean, it comes back to this thing that we keep talking about here, which is just like how much better the boxing is getting in MMA. Mm-hmm. And because Breese is a guy who boxes with boxers. And like he has put in a lot of time in genuine boxing gyms, and he has trained with genuine boxing trainers. And you see everything from his jab to his combination flow to his footwork, it feels crisp and technical. And a guy who can do that, plus like Breese has lots of other really good skill sets too. It's like his boxing has traditionally been secondary to his grappling and his wrestling.
We critiqued his decision making for choosing to grapple for 3 rounds with Keitaro, but he did and won. So that does say something, I think, about his grappling ability.
Yeah, I mean, the dude is just genuinely legit. So I don't know. I'm excited to see what he can do here. It kind of sucks to see good old Dan Kelly get flattened that way, but
yeah, it could have been worse for him, honestly. Like he got his eye cut, and that's really what I think stopped it. So it could have been worse. It was looking like the kind of matchup where he could have gotten obliterated very soon. So
yeah. So yes, you're right. It could have been worse. I'm pretty high on Breeze's chances in a relatively thin division that doesn't have a ton of kind of up and comers. Like get him back into the cage soon. If he can stay healthy, could be really good. He's only 26.
Yeah, although it does feel like sort of a shame that he left welterweight behind just at the time the division was overtaken by like slow-paced fighters that he probably could have done exactly what he wanted to against.
Yeah, I just don't think there was any way for him to make that weight. Yeah. He is enormous. He's a big middleweight, and I think it is not out of the question that he could end up at light heavyweight. Yeah. By the end of his career. He is a big dude. He is a thick 6'3". So
it is still baffling that James Vick is the same height as him at lightweight.
Weird.
I don't know how the human body works. Anyway, let's take one more break. When we come back, we're going to get into the 2 fights that we really care about from UFC Utica. And, you know, I have high hopes for this main event, despite how disappointing the last 3 main events have been. One of those predictably so. But I have high hopes. Jimmie Rivera versus Marlon Moraes. This is a fight that has some heat around it. It's in the bantamweight division, which has yet to really disappoint me and this year, and has just been so interesting to follow. So I'm looking forward to that. We're also going to get into the co-main event, which, as I said before, Gregor Gillespie versus Vince Pichel at lightweight. That one should be fun too. So we'll get into all that after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And welcome back. Segment 3, and that means we are talking about upcoming fights instead of lamenting what just happened last weekend. Here we have bantamweights, Jimmie Rivera, Marlon Moraes. I am very interested in this fight, Pat. More so than I think I have been in the last 3 weeks' main events. This, for me, feels the way I think Till Wonderboy felt for a lot of other people, as like a really intriguing matchup between two exciting but extremely skilled strikers in my favorite division in the UFC, bantamweight.
Yeah, these dudes are both kind of in their late primes. They're both extremely developed fighters. There are not a lot of questions left to answer about either one. This is not like Till, where we still are not quite sure how good he is. Mm-hmm. I think we know how good both Moraes and Rivera are.
Yeah.
And so the question is, how do they match up with each other, and what result is this going to give us in terms of how, like, probably the most exciting division in MMA right now, bantamweight, how that's going to play out moving down. So there are less. I think we have a better sense for what this fight is probably going to look like than we did. I guess Till Thompson was fairly unpredictable in that outcome, but yeah, you get the idea. I think this is real good.
Some people would say predictable. One person in particular I'm thinking of, who I hope is listening to this right now.
Friend of the show, Lucas Bourdon, the greatest hater of Stephen Thompson who has ever existed.
He really is. He's legendary for his hatred, and he really, I mean, he took it worse than I take it for not 100% loving John Lineker. He was getting abused on Sunday during this bout by everyone online, and just took it on the chin, and then just became smugger than ever when Darren Till walked away with the decision. So good for you, Luca. We hope that you're enjoying this. But anyway,
I especially enjoyed his suggestion that, like, they should remake the Karate Kid by putting some of Wonderboy's karate students against some Badr Hari trained youngsters.
Badr Hari trains a bunch of bullies. Badr Hari's Cobra Kai squad. Oh my God.
Yeah, that's I would watch that.
They show up in like a monster truck with bull horns to pit off against Wonderboy's cutie little school bus.
Yikes.
Need to see this movie. Anyway, Rivera Moraes, as I was saying before I was sidetracked, a really compelling matchup here, I think, between two guys Moraes has had now 2 slow fights in the UFC. Jimmie Rivera has had a couple of slow fights. Like, I don't expect this necessarily to be a banger, but neither of these guys have ever been averse have ever wanted to avoid the fight when it breaks out. That's what I really like about this matchup is, unlike Stephen Thompson and Darren Till, I have no reason to believe that when somebody lands a good shot or a couple in sequence and then the other guy gets countered, like, there will be at least extended moments in this fight when an actual fight breaks out, when these guys have to scrap.
Absolutely, yeah, because in terms of the typology here, they're both boxer punchers. Mm-hmm. Rivera leans a little more toward counterpunching, and Moraes leans a little more toward kind of working on the outside. But they both like to exchange. They both like to be in the pocket. They both like to throw counters, and they're not averse to doing it in layers, right? So, and
they both have a really diverse set of skills. Like, both guys can hit a good takedown. Both guys are good kickers as well as good punchers. Both guys can do a lot and are not shy about using their versatility to surprise the opponent.
Yeah, Moraes is probably a little more dangerous a grappler. I think Rivera is probably a stronger wrestler and clinch fighter. But, man, I think, Rivera works at a quicker pace. He's probably a little sharper on the counter. Moraes is a better kicker, a little bit longer, probably has a better jab, maybe. I don't know, pretty even, actually. They're both pretty good jabbers when they go to it. I
was even thinking, like, when I started watching footage for this, I was thinking, one of the things that really sets them apart is Rivera's defense and counterpunching. And I still think he's the better defensive fighter. It's one of the best parts of Rivera's skill set is that he's pretty shockingly hard to hit clean and does really good work off of his defense. But, I watched Moraes' fight with Dotson, and he's a pretty good counterpuncher. You know, like he can land some real devastating counters. He can slip. He can change stance as he's taking an angle. Like he gives ground in really interesting and creative ways, and is always ready to throw a really hard kill shot in response.
He is really good, especially I think Rivera is probably better as more of like a stationary pocket fighter, bending his knees and moving his head and throwing there, kind of seeing your shot coming.
Right.
I think Moraes is better as a counterpuncher in open space, where he can slip back at an angle.
Yeah.
I think he takes really, really good kind of backstepping angles to draw you onto his counters.
It's
I think he's
more
maybe a
like
little sharper there than Rivera is.
That's a good distinction to draw. It's more of like a karate kind of approach. He's more of like a flowy counterpuncher, and Rivera's more of a boxer. But both guys are actually like really skilled in that area. So what do you think of the dynamics of this matchup? Like, what are the big strategic things that each guy has to do to own this one?
I think that the basic dynamic here revolves around how long the fight goes, basically. I think in the first round, it's Rivera's fight. I think he comes out really sharp. His triggers are really good. He comes out ready to throw volume from the opening bell. And I think it's more or less his fight for the first round if he can put Moraes in a position to fight. I think as the fight goes on, Moraes is a more attritive fighter. He has more experience in 5-round fights, and I think he's a better adjuster. So that to me is the basic dynamic is, can Rivera do enough damage early? Can he firmly take the first few rounds? Can he make his power show? Because I think he's probably shot for shot a more powerful puncher than Moraes is.
Yeah, I would say that's fair.
And he works at a better pace when given the opportunity to do so. I think he will have that chance early. The question to me is how long he can make those advantages tell before Moraes' adjustments begin to make a difference.
Yeah. I kind of had the same thought. Like, I was actually a little surprised to look at their stats, and some of Moraes' fights in the UFC so far have been notably slower than the matchups he was having in like World Series of Fighting before coming to this promotion. But I still was surprised. Like, Rivera is a faster worker than Moraes in most of his fights. He does tend to do more, but I still always have this feeling that two things you hit on there are true. He tends to slow down a bit. He kind of seems to lose a little bit of steam. Maybe when he is firing off of those triggers, the reactions are a little bit sluggish or more predictable. But also, as the fight goes on, he doesn't really adjust all that well. He's got some of that Ruben Olivares in him, where it's like he'll come in prepared to do all these things, but maybe it is just fatigue. But he seems to kind of just do his thing. To just at any moment in the fight, he's like, everything's an option. This counter's an option. This counter's an option. But his overall approach to the fight doesn't really transform at all.
Well, I think it's the difference between rote and organic that we've talked about a lot of times. Like, that there's nothing wrong with being a rote fighter. But it does offer certain advantages and disadvantages depending on how that plays together with a fighter's physical characteristics and their skill sets. You can be rote and be great. Like Frankie Edgar was real rote for most of his career. Less so now, but for most of his career, he was pretty dang rote. Jimmie Rivera is a pretty rote fighter. He's extremely well prepared. He has all of the triggers ready to go from the opening bell. He does not hesitate early in a fight. There is no getting to know you period in a Jimmie Rivera fight. If he sees you throw a shot that he's prepared for you to throw, he will throw 4 punches right back at you immediately.
Yeah, and having spoken to him, I don't even think he even, like, it doesn't, I mean, you never know what a fighter's preparation is really like, but I don't even think he does a lot of specific preparing for, like, what the shots his opponents are going to throw. I think it's just like that's how he is as a fighter. He's got that sort of Aldo-esque tension in him where he is just ready to go the moment the fight starts. You can tell, like, the first jab you throw, because of how much training he's done, how much sparring he's done, how much drilling he's done, he's just a very well-schooled fighter. And he knows, okay, they throw a jab, I know what a jab looks like, and I know I can slip this way and throw this shot, or slip that way and throw that shot. He just doesn't hesitate to fire on those triggers at all. But I think maybe that's the problem as the fight goes on, is that somebody like Marlon Moraes can pick up on patterns very well. And if you do just respond immediately to every jab or to every remotely committed shot, how long does it take a guy like Marlon Moraes to start faking those shots or using those reactions against you? And that's where I think Rivera has run into trouble Like, even in the fight with Tomas Almeida, it got a lot harder for him as the bout went on. He just, like, Almeida just kind of got a feel for Rivera's patterns, and Rivera was not able to change things up in a really creative way.
Yeah, I mean, Moraes is a guy who's been scheduled for 5 rounds a lot of times. You know,
True.
He has had a lot of 5-round fights scheduled to go. He's got a lot of experience in them. Not that they've all gone that way. You know, I think he's only gone the full 5-round distance, looks like, twice in his career, but he's been in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This will be his 8th scheduled 5-round fight.
Wow. Yeah.
And he's with a team that has a lot of experience in prepping for 5-round fights. Also, he's a Mark Henry fighter.
True.
So, and he is trained with, and he has training partners who have trained for 5-round fights.
True.
Which I do not think is so much the case for Jimmie Rivera. I don't think I don't know that his camp is going to have planned for that, and I don't know that he as a fighter is necessarily built for that.
Yeah. It's a good stable at Tiger Schulman, man. They have especially a lot of up-and-comers, but yeah, Mark Henry has had, like, championship caliber fighters for a long time now.
Exactly. So I think I lean toward Moraes for that reason. I've been a believer in him for a long time. I like Rivera's game a lot, but I just think especially if Moraes takes an attritive approach and really works the legs, he's a great leg kicker. He's an extraordinary leg kicker when he puts his mind to it. If he can work the legs, if he can work the body, we know he's capable of doing both of those things. And really tries to drag the fight into the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, I think it's his to lose.
Mm-hmm. I tend to agree. I do think it's the kind of matchup where, like, Moraes being the more organic, flowy, feel-based kind of striker, it does, I think, make him a lot more willing to just sell out on, like, unset up shots. He will just try to surprise people. And I think he's probably going to get countered hard quite a few times in, like, the 1st round especially. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a matchup in which Moraes got dropped and had to go on the defensive. But as the fight goes on, as he kind of learns his way around Rivera's range and Rivera's, like, 5 or 6 favorite responses, I think it'll be hopefully a real test of whether or not Rivera can adapt. And maybe we see something new from Rivera. Like, it's not impossible. He hasn't been fighting at this level forever. But Moraes kind of has. He's very experienced in 5-round fights, and yeah, I think those adjustments down the stretch are probably going to tell. But I'm very excited for it, man. Like, both of these guys, please don't let me down, guys. Please put on a good fight. It's all I want. It's just a main event that most of the 5 rounds are fun to watch. That's all I want.
Doesn't even have to be all the rounds.
No, just
I'd settle for 3 fun.
Yeah, give me 2.5 good rounds. You know, like the 2.5 can carry a lot of weight for the other part. So it's all right. Just hit each other a little. As
just
for the
bleed.
just bleed, please. Just bleed is supposed to be like this really authoritative demand, but I like imagining it as like a desperate plea. Please,
you are begging for blood.
Just bleed. That's all I ask.
So so I think there were a couple more fights we wanted to talk to real quick on this card before we wrap up. Maybe one of the best prospects at lightweight, Gregor Gillespie, fighting Vince from Hell Pichel. What do you make of this?
One of the best nicknames at lightweight, right there.
Absolutely, great movie too.
Yeah, I'm really thinking this is Gillespie's fight. Though there is one area in which Pichel, like, I don't fully understand this matchup, if I'm honest. Why it was made, other than they just needed somebody for Gillespie to fight, and maybe every other weekend Gillespie was busy fly fishing, so this is all he could do. But Vince Pichel is a powerful counter striker. He is comfortable being, he's kind of Woodley-esque in the way that he's comfortable being put on the cage. He can be really dangerous for those counter shots, big single shots. He can time those things sometimes surprisingly well. And I can see that being trouble for Gillespie. There's also the fact that Pichel's pretty big and strong. But the dynamics of the matchup feel like it'll be Gillespie's fight to lose, because if Pichel allows himself to be put in the positions where I see he has the skills to trouble Gillespie, he's still going to be playing Gillespie's game. And when you're against a fighter as aggressive as Gillespie, you cannot be waiting for the opportunities to counter. You can't just think I'm going to get that one perfect shot. You have to take all of the opportunities as they present themselves, because if you don't, the pressure is just going to keep mounting, and you're going to get fewer and smaller opportunities as the fight goes on. And when Gillespie's aggressive, mixing his boxing and his wrestling, he is like a pit bull. He is really, really hard to shake off. So, what about you?
Yeah, well, so you asked, you said you didn't really see the point of this matchup, and I think that's exactly the point of this matchup. Is a guy, Lucy, loose, stop it.
You were saying.
Sorry, can we take that back? I'll just take that back from the beginning. Yeah. So, Connor, you said you didn't really see the point of this matchup. I think this is exactly the point of the matchup, is that Pichel is a guy with the skill sets to trouble Gillespie tactically in a strategic context that favors Gillespie. So this is basically, I think it's a really smart matchmaking test of, can Gillespie figure out how to not fuck up in a fight and put himself in a position where those tactical disadvantages, like a pretty skilled and powerful counterpuncher against a guy who is extremely offensively focused in Gillespie, a guy who is a pretty good wrestler in his own right, knows how to defend a takedown, knows how to hurt you in the clinch also, and a guy who's a pretty solid grappler. Those are all things that, put right, you can see Pichel's game plan to winning this fight. Especially if Gillespie can't make some adjustments, because I think Gillespie is going to eat some shots on the counter. He is probably going to get some takedown stuffed. And to me, this is a question of, Pichel has put together a pretty good career in the UFC. It's just been weird and separated by these really long layoffs. So Pichel's a good fighter. He's got good skills. He's pretty physical. And Gillespie's not huge. So I think there's a lot to like in this matchup as a test for Gillespie. That is the purpose. It is to test Gillespie in these very specific ways.
I'm down with that. I think that's a very good justification. I think maybe the reason that it does just off the bat sort of rubs me, not wrong, but not the way I want it to, is that Gillespie's 31. As a prospect, he does seem like a prospect. He's got a very short MMA career and has come surprisingly far away in a short time. But I'm almost thinking like Gillespie needs like boulder tests, risky tests. And Pichel doesn't strike me as that risky. He is a good fighter, but I think you need somebody at this point like who can ask Gillespie some of those strategic questions. Somebody who can stuff a lot of takedowns, or I don't know. I just feel like Pichel doesn't do enough. He's not active enough to force Gillespie to really adjust.
If you think Gillespie could be the guy, you happen to be in the one division that is, or maybe one of the two divisions that is deep enough to slowly but surely ask those questions. Because Gillespie is real raw. He's only been fighting as a pro for, I think, 4 years, maybe even less than 4 years.
January 2014 was his debut.
Yeah. So coming up on 4.5 years. This, I think, is exactly the right fight at exactly the right time. In his next fight, you say, okay, we're going to give you some rock-solid defensive wrestler on the fringes of the top 15 and say, okay, now it's time to figure out what you can do when you can't just fall back on your takedowns. Because I think at the end of the day here, Gillespie is probably going to eat some shots on the feet, be forced to fall back on his wrestling, hit some takedowns against a guy who knows how to defend him reasonably well, and figure out, kind of go to a plan B here. I think he's going to have to. So yeah, that's something I'd like to see.
Yeah, the thing is, one thing that's so impressive about Gillespie is that he doesn't have to really complete his takedowns to be effective with them. He will just hang on your hips and keep you, so you're constantly fighting his weight and fighting his momentum, and he doesn't have to work that hard to keep that pressure on. So again, I'm not really sold on the idea that this is going to make Gillespie do something different, which is what I feel like I'm ready for, but I get it. I think it's a good explanation for why the matchup is happening. And after this, essentially, will be the point at which we need to see Gillespie step up. And it does sound like we're both expecting him to win this one.
Yeah, I expect him to. I expect a 29-28 decision or 30-27 decision, maybe a late finish.
All right. What else from this card? Anything else? You mentioned there were a couple of fights that interested you.
Yeah, there were a couple of things. Like last week's card, more individual fighters than matchups.
Yeah,
I'm a big David Tamor fan. I have enjoyed his stylings
Absolutely.
in the UFC. He's fighting Nick Lentz. I will be interested to see. I will be hoping that he can find ways to shut down Lentz's takedown game and beat him up on the feet. I think he probably will.
Wreck Lentz. That feels like a very favorable matchup. Tamor is a very capable wrestler for a Muay Thai stylist.
He's also a guy who can hurt you in the clinch if you screw up on your shots, which like Lentz relies really heavily on chaining and grinding. And Tamor, I think, is a guy who is much more vulnerable to really explosive single shots that get in deep on his hips. Mm-hmm. So that strikes me as a good matchup for Tamor. And so I will look forward to hopefully seeing him style on Nick Lentz. Tamor's brother, Daniel Tamor, is also fighting on this card. He is fighting a guy that I thought was a pretty fun prospect a few years back, ran into some problems on the regionals before he got the call up to the UFC, Julio Arce. Mm-hmm.
He ran into Brian Kelleher.
Yeah, who is just like the worst matchup for you if you're a prospect.
Yeah, basically.
That guy is a prospect killer type fighter. But Arce is a real fun southpaw, good boxer, real crisp, clean hands, kind of like a less counterpunching oriented, higher volume Jimmie Rivera on the feet.
Who is a teammate of Jimmie Rivera, Julio Arce.
Yeah, he was actually Arce, I believe, won the New York Golden Gloves a few years back, in addition to everything else.
Wouldn't surprise me. The thing that really stood out in his last fight was his counter punching, like his combination punching in the pocket was really, really sharp. And I think that is like a guaranteed matchup for a fun fight with Daniel Tamor, who is like his brother David Tamor in that he like is willing to throw a lot of full powered shit, but without most of the subtlety.
Yes.
So we're probably in for a slobber knocker here in which the more skilled banger is probably going to win.
Yeah, I really like that. Also, all the way down on the undercard is one of a really, really good prospect debuting, Jose Torres. In the opening fight of the night, debuting against Jared Brooks, who is not a bad fighter in his own right. Torres has a lot of experience on the regional scene, very good quality experience on the regionals, and also is also one of the first fighters to come through who had like a really deep and strong amateur background. Like he fought in those IMMAF tournaments, those like world amateur championship type tournaments. Mm-hmm. So he's interesting to me in that regard. I think his game is pretty straightforward and pretty meat and potatoes, but he's physically gifted, he's athletic, and he has taken his time to develop his game before getting into the UFC. He's a guy to keep your eye on. He could end up being pretty good. Yeah,
it's definitely not a kind matchup for either guy. Like Jared Brooks is in a similar position. He should be regarded as a prospect and just suffered his first pro loss to Davison Figueiredo after beating Eric Shelton. So it's not a kind matchup, but it's one between like two young, promising, athletically gifted fighters. So that should be fun. Yeah, like the more I look at this card, I'm kind of getting sold on it. Like the main event, I'm just clinging on to hope here, but I really feel like it has to be better than last week and the week before. I see no way Jimmie Rivera and Marlon Moraes could conspire to turn it in a really ugly main event. And maybe not a lot of the matchups stand out as like must-see fights, but there's some really good prospects on here, and some action fighters besides. Like, nobody's going to be writing home about Jake Ellenberger versus Ben Saunders, but it's hard to imagine it not being entertaining. And there's quite a few of those. John Vellante versus Sam Alvey is happening at light heavyweight. How did I not notice this before? Okay, so I'm down for this. This is my favorite card in UFC history, and it should be better than last week, I think.
Yeah, I'm here for it. I think you'll be able to find a far worse thing to do with a couple of hours once you've DVR'd it, and you're looking to fill a couple hours.
Skip the commercials. Don't rely on Fox Sports 1 pacing. We are looking at a 6-fight main card on Fox Sports 1 here. Ooh. So DVR it, watch it on Sunday. You will thank yourself later. Yeah. But otherwise, that's about it for us, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Nothing else of substance to discuss, and thank God. We have no reason until it comes up on the MMA Depressed Us. Neither of us has any reason to watch Stephen Thompson versus Darren Till ever again. Now we've discussed it, the research is done, so it's now fully in the past, and I'm grateful for that. I'm also grateful for all of you tuning in to listen to this week's episode of Heavy Hands. Make sure you come back next week. We will be talking about UFC 225, and of course, as we've been saying now for the last month, that is essentially the card we've all been waiting for. Robert Whittaker fighting a rematch against Yoel Romero, now as the defending champion. Rafael dos Anjos, hopefully delivering some much-deserved justice to Colby Covington. The UFC debut of Megan Anderson against Holly Holm. There's good stuff happening on this card, and we are excited to talk to you about it, and definitely excited to watch it go down. Until then, make sure you find us on social media. You can find Pat at Patrick_Wyman. You can find me at Boxing Bush. Those are both on Twitter, of course. You can also find us both on Facebook, facebook.com/Conor Rebush MMA or Patrick Wyman MMA. And, check out all the shit we do. Make sure you go check out Tides of History, and keep an eye out for my articles on Bloody Elbow this week as well. And until next time, if you guys came here today for the finer points of face punching, and optimistically hoping for us to be a little more optimistic about the state of MMA, then you might have come to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.